The Cult Tunnel. This is an entirely true story about a tunnel my friend and I found about 2 years ago. I was 16 and my friend was 17. We got the bus together to and from school, so we always talked about what we were going to do at the weekend. We did lots of different walks, finding lots of random things like a sawmill and an abandoned warehouse. On one walk, we were going to a rope swing we found the year before, but hadn't been to in at least 3 months. To our horror, not just the swing but the whole branch had been cut down, and recently too. There was a path away from the swing that we hadn't been down before, so we decided to venture down it, talking about why someone would have cut down the swing. As we went down, we saw a rectangle made of railings on the left side of the path. We walked over it and looked inside. It was a mesh that had some broken locks and ripped chains on it. There were locks and chains all over the ground around the rectangle of railings that surrounded the mesh, and they had obviously been smashed. We climbed over the railings and looked in between the mesh. There were stairs down to a circular tunnel, with large pipes leading into it on either side. The tunnel was made of concrete, and was big enough for us to fully stand up in. We tried to open the mesh where the locks had been broken, and it came open surprisingly easily. We tentatively walked down the concrete steps and looked into the tunnel. We could see the light at the end of the tunnel. It went under a rarely used road, which is probably the reason it was so long. I always had a lot of survival things in my bag, like a flashlight, matches and binoculars. I took out my flashlight and went first down the tunnel. It had been a dry few weeks, which is surprising for an English winter, so the floor wasn't flooded. As we kept walking, we kept finding odd objects along the floor, like used shotgun shells and burned candles. We thought nothing of it, and picked a few shells up as keepsakes. When we got halfway through, we kept seeing scrawling on the wall, some of which we couldn't read. The only thing we could read was the word incarnate written dozens of times throughout the tunnel. Around the middle of the tunnel, we saw things that stopped us in our tracks. There were pitchforks, knives, spades, axes and lots of other weapons that had been sharpened to perfection. My friend picked a knife up and inspected it. Etched into the blade was the word incarnate, and was covered in a weird sticky substance. We weren't sure if it was blood or not, but my friend instantly put it down, and we started to walk back. Then, we heard voices from the way we had just walked. To our horror, 2 people were coming down the steps, and one lit a lantern. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but they were talking quietly, but stopped when they saw the light from our flashlight. That moment of still and silence felt like it lasted an eternity. Then they started running at us. We turned and ran the opposite direction, all the while the men behind us were screaming. As we got a quarter of the way to the other end of the tunnel, I risked a glance behind me. The men, who I then realized were wearing long dark red robes with hoods, had stopped and I breathed a sigh of relief but kept running. It was then I realized that they had stopped and picked up some weapons. Since I wasn't looking where I was running, I didn't see we were running into the flooded bit of the tunnel. Before I realized, I was up to my knees in water. Thankfully, we were almost at the stairs to go up. We went up the stairs and pushed open the mesh. We didn't know where we were, but we just ran. Eventually we found a route that we knew, and ran back to the village we lived in. When we were almost at my friend's house, we realized how drenched we were, and given that it was winter, we were all of a sudden freezing. We never told the police, as we thought it would be our little secret and thought it was cool. We never went back to that tunnel. If there is any message of this, always make sure you have protection on you if you are exploring abandoned places. My friend and I still explore abandoned places, but make sure that we have forms of protection just in case that this happens again.